Okay, let's get started. Hello and welcome to Bees and Honey, brought to you by Loudoun County Public Library and the Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy. I'm Lorraine Moffa, Programming Coordinator at the library and your host today. Please feel free to communicate with me during the program by using the chat feature located on the bottom right of the WebEx screen. At the end of the presentation, I can relay your questions to the speakers. Tim and Liz Dennison, VP and President of Secret Garden Birds and Bees, have been beekeepers for 5 years. They have a small apiary of between 5 and 8 hives and sell their honey at local fairs and to members of our community looking for local raw honey. They're both active members of the Loudoun Beekeepers Association, and Tim has served on the board of directors. Tim and Liz also mentor new beekeepers to help them get started in the very interesting and rewarding hobby of beekeeping. So welcome, Tim and Liz.
Hi, thank you very much for having us. And we're very excited about being able to talk to everyone here about bees and beekeeping and some of the wonderful benefits that we can get from the products that the bees produce. So I'm going to get started with this very first picture that we have right up here, because this is actually Tim right here and a young friend, and they are setting up a hive. And this is how beekeepers often get their bees. You buy a box of bees, as you can see this young man holding, and then you shake them into a hive that you have set up that is empty. And amazingly enough, they do go in there, they stay in there, and will start to work for you. So there are a lot of bees in the world. There are 20,000 known species of bees, 4,000 of them in the US, 900 in the eastern US, and 154 at Blandy Experimental Farm. And that's a farm that's associated with the State Arboretum, just out Route 50, a little west of the Shenandoah River. And it's a wonderful place. And there are lots of bees there, so many different kinds of bees. But only one kind of bee, the European honeybee, actually makes honey. And I do want to mention that it is the European honeybee. That is not a native species of bee here in the United States. So, you know, when we're talking about conserving native species, we're not really talking about honeybees. But honeybees face the same kind of risks that our native bees do. And anything that we do to make things safer and better for the honeybees also is beneficial to all our native bees and other insects. Now, beekeeping has been around for a very long time. We have cave paintings going back to 7,000 BC, and all the time in between then and now, beekeeping has been practiced. I know they just found a clay pot 3,500 BC in Africa that still has honey and propolis in it. So this has been going on for a long time. And originally, people were harvesting from feral hives that were in trees and in caves and things like that. But very quickly, people began to manage the bees. And you can see there's a Roman apiary there where there would have been a beehive in each of those little holes. So, you know, people have been using honey and using all the products for a long, long time. But beekeeping has changed a bit. Actually, the practice is pretty much the same. What a beekeeper does day to day is probably very similar to what they would have done in Roman times. But the locations have changed, and modern urban beekeeping is becoming a very popular hobby and pastime for people, even in the cities and in the suburbs. And you know, you'll find that it is allowed in most places and with very few restrictions, and that the bees actually do fairly well. They do seem to find places to forage, and they do seem to find the flowers. You can see this wonderful rooftop garden that has lots of flowers for the bees, but even without that, they will go out and find what they need. What you're looking at is some of the more common types of hives that are used nowadays. The ones that look like boxes are Langstroth hives. Those are probably the most common. This one in the middle there is a top bar hive. It's just a different way of arranging the frames that the bees build the honey on. But, it is becoming very, very popular. Now, remembering that these are not native species, bees in most areas are considered livestock and treated as livestock. So when you're dealing with like a neighborhood association or a homeowners association, that's how they're probably going to look at it, that it is livestock. So why do we keep honeybees? Why have people been keeping honeybees for thousands of years? Well, there are really two reasons, and one is pollination. We know that plants need pollinators in order to produce seed. They need pollinators to move pollen from the male parts of the flower to the female parts of the flower. At least in some plants that have kind of a sticky pollen. Other plants may be able to do that just with the wind. But pollinators are very important. And that has become a very big industry as big industrial farms have grown. So you will see things like this truck in that picture. All of those different color boxes are individual beehives. And those hives will be placed in the middle of a field of, say, almond trees, or where there are blueberries, cherries, many, many kinds of crops are pollinated by honeybees. And the reason honeybees are used is because they can be managed. Bats do pollination, butterflies, moths, beetles, even wild native bees. But none of them can really be managed in a way that they can be brought to the fields at a time when you need them for pollination and then removed or moved to other fields. So honeybees have really been domesticated to do that. In addition to pollination, bees are also great at producing a number of products that we like to use. And that's anything from the honey itself, which is delicious, to all kinds of cosmetic products, medicinal products, possibly some allergy relief, and of course, honey wine or mead. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some things. Oh, but I wanted to show you in some parts of the world, this is South Africa. This is a little honey truck, and they're selling all kinds of honey products right out of this truck. Including honey liqueur, honey beer, mead, skincare products, and gelato. So honey's pretty popular. Honey and bee products are pretty popular all over the world. But before we get into talking about the kinds of things that bees produce, I want to talk a little bit about the hive. So what we're looking at here is a bee tree. In the wild, this is the kind of tree a honeybees would live in. They would find the hole in a big old hollow tree, and these would be feral bees. And they would build their comb in there, and they would stay in there possibly for a very long time. But remember, in this country, they're not native, so survival in the wild is not guaranteed, and they often don't last for too many years. So who lives in the hive? Well, there are three types of honeybees. There's the queen bee, which everybody knows about, and there is usually one queen in a hive. There are drones in the hive. The drones are the males, and there are a few drones in the hive. And the rest are worker bees, and the worker bees are all female. And there could be anywhere from, what would you say, 30,000, 30 to 60,000 worker bees in a hive. And so the queen bee has one job, and that's laying eggs. When a queen bee emerges from her cell for the first time, one of the first things she's going to do is go out on a mating flight. And she is going to mate with as many drones as she can over a period of a few days. And then she'll return to the hive. And that's kind of a risky time for the hive because that queen is out there on her own and she could be eaten by birds. She could run into all kinds of problems and never return to the hive. And that can be a problem for a hive. They would have to produce a new queen and start over. But assuming that she returns, she will proceed to spend the rest of her 2 to 4 year life laying eggs. And she can lay thousands of eggs in a day. And it's very important that she be a healthy queen and that she be well mated because bees need to have a constant generation of eggs and larvae and hatching bees and new bees to keep the hive alive. So beekeepers do spend a lot of time looking for the queen bee. Now, this queen bee in this picture, you can see has a kind of a bright yellow dot on her with the number 35. If beekeepers buy a queen or they buy a box of 3 pounds of bees, the queen is usually marked like that. It makes her a lot easier to find among all those bees that are moving around in the hive. If she isn't marked, it can be kind of a challenge. She is a little bigger, a little longer, shaped a little differently, but she is hard to find and she moves very fast. So when you're looking in one place, she can dart out from there and go around the other side, and she's a challenge. And you can see the beekeepers looking for her. Now, I did say there's one queen in a hive, and that's not always exactly true. It's often thought to be true because when beekeepers are looking for a queen, they find one and they stop. But if they keep looking, sometimes they can find a second one. And remember, they're only marked the first time you buy one. So if after 2 years that queen has died and the hive has made a new queen, she is not going to be marked and she would be harder to find and she could be hiding in there somewhere. The drones, the males, have exactly one job, and that's mating with a queen. The lifespan of a drone is until he mates. Mating is unfortunately fatal for a drone. And if he doesn't mate, he will be kicked out of the hive before the winter anyway. So he has had one job, but it is true that a hive has to have some drones in it to be a truly healthy hive. And I'm not sure anyone understands exactly why that is true, but it is. The hive needs to have some drones running around in there too. Worker bees do absolutely everything else. They build comb, they raise brood, they cool the hive, warm the hive, fetch water, they defend the hive, they clean it, they move the colony when necessary, they raise new queens, they make decisions. The queen, we often think of the queen as the ruler of the hive, but that's not really true. Everything that happens in a hive is a decision made by the hive, by the worker bees. And the queen just does their bidding. They forage for nectar, forage for pollen, and make honey. The lifespan of a worker bee is about 6 to 8 weeks from the spring through the fall. And during that time, every bee has a job, but it's not the same job throughout its entire lifespan. When a bee first hatches, the first job it has is to clean out the cells in the hive. As it gets a little older, it becomes a nurse bee and it helps to raise the young brood. After that, they become the builders, and then the guards, and they protect the hive. And then finally, they become foragers, the bees that actually go out to gather nectar and pollen and water and the things that the hive needs. So it's the older bees that are out there flying around. And that makes sense because at that point, they're already getting near the end part of their life. If they get eaten by the birds or they don't make it back to the hive, it's less of a loss to the hive. Winter bees are a little bit different. Winter bees can live up to 6 months. And very often when you look at the hives in the winter, they're covered with snow. You don't really hear anything from them. You don't see any bees flying around. But those bees are very busy during the winter. And their job is to keep the queen warm and keep her fed and to keep the hive alive long enough to be able to raise the first brood of worker bees in the spring. And they do that by vibrating muscles in their body that generates warmth. Just like you would get warm if you're running and exercising, they are exercising in the hive to be warm. So even when it's very, very cold outside, they can keep a hive as warm as 95 degrees in the center. And the bees will kind of move in and out of the center so that all of the bees have a chance to be nice and warm. But the queen will be right in the middle for most of the time. This takes a lot of food. So, prior to the winter, the bees are really going to build up their stores of honey, and that's going to be their nourishment to get them through the winter. And one of the things beekeepers have to do is make sure that every hive has enough of those stores to get it through the winter. And if not, we might have to supplement it a little bit. Yes? Now, this is what it looks like inside a hive. And we've talked a little bit about how the bees are, reproduce individual bees and what the individual bees do. But we also like to think of the hive as a superorganism, as a single organism. And we do that when we think about its personality. Every hive has a personality of its own. We have hives that are very calm, very docile. Sometimes you can go and work on a hive and you don't even really need a bee suit. You can actually pick up the bees in your hand and they're just very gentle. Other hives can sometimes be extremely angry. Anything you do and you can hear that hum rise up and all the bees come flying out and they're flying all around you and it's kind of a little bit of a scary experience, and it is a personality. And all of that comes from the genetics of the queen and the drones that she is mated with. I know people have heard of Africanized bees. That's just a particular genetics that makes bees more aggressive. And beekeepers will very often, if they have a hive that's very angry or a hive that they consider to be hot, they might call it, they will usually dispatch that queen and either purchase a new queen or let the hive build a new queen and go out on her mating flight and hope for different genetics that will calm that hive down. Because a very angry hive is difficult to deal with, although in many cases they produce a lot of honey. So that's part of it. Now, we talked about individual reproduction of bees, laying the eggs, raising the brood, but the whole hive reproduces periodically. As new bees are born, the hive can get very, very full. It can get overcrowded. And when that happens, it's time for it to split into two hives. And you can see that that is going to happen when you look at the frames inside and you look at the honeycomb and you can see, I don't know if you can see my arrows here, but you can see this area here where it says workers. All of those are developing worker bee larvae. The larger ones up here where it says drones, where they come up a little bit above the honeycomb there, they are drones and they will be the male bees. But down here at the bottom, these larger cells down here, these are potential queens. This is where the hive is raising new queen bees. And when that queen, those new queens, when they get close to hatching, the hive will divide itself in two. And half of the bees will fly off in what beekeepers call a swarm. And they will take the queen, the existing queen, with them, and they'll find a place to hang out for a little while, often in a tree, but it could be anywhere. I've seen it on cars, on motorcycles, I've seen it on the ground, and it's just a clump of bees. And what they're doing is they are sitting there waiting and sending out scouts to look for a new place to live. And those scouts are going to go all around the area. They're going to come back and they're going to report with their little waggle dance and communication skills what they have found and where it is. And this will go on with all of the bees, going to each other's sites until they come to a consensus of what is the best spot. And then the whole clump of bees will head off to that spot and start the new hive. When they're in this condition here, they're very docile. You can actually handle them. And I think in the next slide, well, before I say that, I want to say this is something that when a beekeeper sees this is a chance to capture a hive of bees. So if you ever see a clump of bees like this, wherever it might be, on a tree, on the eaves of your house, or wherever, the best thing to do is contact your local beekeepers association, and someone will likely come out and try to catch it. It's a great way to get bees without having to buy a box of bees. And you can see that here. What's on the left side of this, there's a swarm of bees on the ground. And this gentleman is just picking it up and shaking it into a beehive. And you might notice he's doing it without any gloves on or anything, because the bees have nothing to protect. They have no honey stores. They have no comb that they've built. They have no larvae that they're protecting. They're just bees, and they can just be dumped into the box. If they're up high on a tree, they can be caught with a trap. And that's what's sitting on that ladder on the right side. It's just basically one box of a hive with some existing comb that we took from older hives, and a little swarm commander, which is mostly lemongrass that the bees are attracted to. And they might just go into that, and very often they do. And that's another way of getting bees. But beekeepers don't like to leave it to chance. So when we do inspections, and one of the things that beekeepers do fairly often is inspecting the hive. We look for the queen, we look to see how much honey is in there and how much pollen, and we look to see how much of the larva there is, and how the general overall health. And when we start seeing those cells hanging down there, those queen cells at the bottom of that left picture, we know that hive is getting ready to swarm. And we'll often go in there and do it for them. We'll take half the bees and the queen, just like they would do themselves, and put it into new boxes. And over the years, you can keep doing that over and over again as you monitor your hives, and you can really grow from, one hive into many. Now, there's one other situation. Sometimes when bees are looking for a new place to live, they might choose an unfortunate location like your house. And bees can get into the walls, they can get into the attics, they can get into all kinds of places where you really don't want them to be. And this is a serious situation. And, again, the best thing to do is to call one of your local beekeeping clubs and get someone who is experienced in extractions to deal with this, because these bees do have a hive. They have the honeycomb, they have honey, they have larvae, they have a queen in there. They are going to protect that vigorously. So it's not a matter of just going in there and trying to pull that out. And beekeepers have tools that would help them do it. Also, don't let someone ever tell you that you can just spray it and kill the bees and that'll be fine, because what you'll be left with is 60,000 dead bees in your wall, plus a bunch of honey and pollen and wax, and that is going to attract insects and vermin of all kinds, and it really needs to be thoroughly cleaned out and thoroughly sealed up, or you will have an ongoing problem of bees coming back and vermin continuing to come back. So now that's all about what goes on in the hives and what the bees are doing. Now, products of the hive. So when the bees go out and forage, they bring back pollen, they bring back the nectar, and they bring back sometimes some resin from pine trees and things like that. And they bring that all to the hive, and they create the honeycomb and then the honey and all. So we can take some of those materials and make a lot of things out of them. We all know about beeswax candles. These are rolled candles. There are also candles that are made by melting the wax into various forms that can be absolutely lovely. They have a beautiful smell when you burn them, a beautiful scent. All kinds of cosmetics are made out of beeswax, lotions, lip balms, hair products, and so on. Soaps are another thing that can be made out of beeswax. And finally, a fairly new product, these are wraps for food that are reusable. They cling to the jars and things that you're trying to cover. And it's a new way of using the beeswax that's becoming a lot more popular now. So that's something to look for in some of the stores coming up now. Products of the hive number 2. Now, these are some things that are a little difficult to really quantify because not a lot of actual real scientific study has been done on them. And part of that is because it's really difficult. When bees go out and forage and they're bringing back nectar and pollen, well, there's no way to really know what they're going to find and what they're going to bring back. So when they bring back bee pollen, as we see in the picture on the left, and they bring it back in little so they have little pockets on their leg. You can see that bee has a lot of kind of a reddish pollen attached to her leg. It can be anything. It can be pollen from any type of flower that is blooming at that particular time. So it will change during the year, and it will change with what's around them. So, it's hard to quantify in a laboratory study. The same thing with the propolis. Propolis is bee glue. The bees make this stuff to seal up any openings in their hives, any holes that might be there. It is absolutely waterproof. It is impossible to get off of clothing or off of anything. It's really an amazing thing, and it contains a variety of different materials, and you can see the list there, and it may have a lot of health benefits, but again, it's difficult to know because it says that it has vitamins B, C, and E. It has flavonoids, phenols, aromatic compounds, and so on. And it may have anti-inflammatory effects. It may fight against bacteria, but you never really know exactly what is in it. Some uses that I have seen of it more recently, it is a way to make a food-safe wood sealant or wood glue. And I have seen it used a little bit. Some places are experimenting with it in dentistry to seal up crowns and things like that. So, there are some uses beginning, but it's an interesting product. I don't know. Then there is thank you, royal jelly. It's covered up on my screen, I guess. Royal jelly. And royal jelly has a reputation for all kinds of amazing properties. But royal jelly is mostly water with varying amounts of proteins, sugars, fats, vitamins, and things like that. All of these things really have most of the same components and most of the same properties. They may have some health benefits, they may not. It's interesting. It's an area that needs some more study. I do want to mention the bee pollen. If, this is something that people eat, it's considered to be a health food. People often sprinkle it on yogurt, on salads, on things like that. Please be careful with that if you have pollen allergies, because in each of those little granules of bee pollen, there is a lot of pollen. So people with allergies may have a strong reaction to that. Okay, so now moving on to honey, because that's what, when we think about beehives, we really think most about the honey. And as it says here, honey is a sweet, viscous food substance made by bees, and it's produced by sugary secretion of plants, which is floral nectar, or from secretions of other insects, such as honeydew, which is actually the excrement from other bees that can sometimes be sweet and sticky, and honeybees will feed on that. And there's enzymatic activities that goes on within the bee's stomach. They regurgitate it, and then they evaporate the water out of it. The honey is food for the hive. And bees will continue to make honey. They never decide that it's enough. They will continue to make honey as long as there are things blooming that they can use to make honey with. And that is how beekeepers are able to take some. We harvest honey usually between May and July. And then after that, we usually let the bees keep whatever they produce to use through the winter. That way they have enough and we can still are able to take some. Most of the honey that you're going to find locally is wildflower honey. And it's called that because most beekeepers really have absolutely no idea what type of flowers their bees are feeding on. We can tell a little bit by the season. When we look in the hive very early in the spring, it might be dandelions, it might be autumn olive, things that bloom very early. And if we harvest that honey, then we know that that's spring flowers. As we go a little bit later, right now, what I'm seeing blooming out there's a lot of black locust and things like that. So the honey that's being produced now probably still has some dandelion, and we're starting to get some clover and the black locust, but it's difficult to tell. And what you're looking at in this picture is the honeycomb, and that's all pollen in the honeycomb, and it's all different colors because they have foraged on all different types of plants. And when they produce honey from the nectar, they will produce honey that can be all different colors, and that can change through the seasons and depending on where the hive is. And in fact, in past years with the Loudon Beekeepers Association, we have done honey tastings at some of the local fairs, and you can see that, depending on, it'll be 10 different beekeepers with their honey, and some will be a very light yellow. You can hardly see any color at all the way to almost a dark brown. And it just depends on the foraging. And sometimes bees will find unusual things to forage on. There was one case where there was some bright blue honey because there had been some sort of spill at, I think it was a Gatorade factory, and they found some nice sugary blue dyed substance to forage on and bring that back to the hive. So occasionally it could be something strange, and not usually, we hope, but it can happen. So the honey harvest. So what you're looking at, this is a frame that beekeepers use in the hive to let the bees build their comb on. It's easy to pull out and it's easy to harvest. This particular frame is full of honey and it's capped with wax. So I mentioned that the bees store the nectar in the honeycomb, and then they dry it out by drying the hive and using their wings and blowing air over it. And when it's dry to the right moisture content, they cap it with wax. So that's honey that's capped with wax. And we know that that then is ready to harvest. All we have to do is shake those bees off of it. We can harvest honey in two ways. One way is comb honey. And that's just cutting that honeycomb out of the frame and packaging it like this. So when you buy comb honey, you are getting all of the wax cappings, the wax in the comb, and the honey itself, any little bit of pollen that's in there, you're getting everything that the bees put in there. Another way is to extract the honey. And extracting the honey, we go in and we take the cappings off, and we usually save those wax cappings because they can be made into candles and other products. Then we put the frames in an extractor that we spin. Centrifugal force gets the honey off of the frames, and then we can drain it from that container through a filter. And we use the filter because that will take out any of the larger pieces of wax and any other things you might have in there, occasionally bee parts or bits of other insects and things, and give you honey that's a little bit cleaner. It usually does not filter out the pollen that's in the honey, and it is still considered raw, unprocessed honey. It is simply put through a fairly large filter. And then it's labeled and bottled. And we are required to put labels on it with our name and address, and also the warning about the risks of giving honey to children younger than 1 year because of a botulism toxin that could be in there, and that really only affects children under 1 year old. You can buy local honey in a number of places. A lot of the local fairs will sell honey. Some of the local stores do. And you can often get it from most of the local beekeeper associations as well, and from just neighbors who are beekeepers. A typical pound of honey these days around here is about $10 a pound, maybe a little more for the comb honey. Now, in addition to eating honey, which, I don't think I need to tell you how to eat honey. Pretty much everybody knows how to eat honey. Honey is gaining use as a medicinal product. And most commonly when we talk about medicinal honey, we're talking about Manuka honey. And Manuka honey is produced in Australia and in New Zealand from a particular plant that grows there. And the reason this is used medicinally is honey has some wonderful properties, and all honey does. But the Manuka honey seems to have the most of the properties that we're looking for in medicinal honey. So that's the one that's most often used. And we're just really starting to get into research into medicinal honey. A long time ago, it was used a lot for many, many kinds of things, and used effectively. And then it kind of fell out of favor as modern medicine kind of took over. But now they're starting to look back at honey, and especially as we're seeing many things become resistant to antibiotics and things like that, we're looking at honey as an alternative. So this is, I'm not going to read this whole list, but this is a list of pathogens that are eliminated by honey. And you can see it's quite a list, and a lot of these are very common and things that we encounter. And if honey can have some effect on these, that's a good thing. I'm not saying that honey can replace modern medicine, but as kind of a support in addition to it, this can be very helpful. And in addition to the pathogens that are eliminated, honey does seem to have antifungal, antiviral, anti-inflammatory effects as well. So honey is being used a lot for wound care. And I'm sharing this picture because I am a wildlife rehabilitator and I work with birds of prey. And this is a photo I took of an owl, a great horned owl that had been entangled in barbed wire. And as you can see, that wing is in pretty bad shape. And we do treat many of these animals with honey. Putting honey on these kinds of wounds and then putting a wet dressing over them and just bandaging that up for a while seems to have really to promote fast healing. It heals without scarring. The dressings do not stick to the wound. And for animals in particular, it's safe. You know, if they were to chew on it or to consume it, it's not going to do them any harm. But we use it quite a bit in wildlife rehabilitation, and veterinarians are beginning to use it a lot. There was a very good article in the latest issue of the American Bee Journal on the medicinal honey for animals. Excellent article, and if I don't know if you can get hold of that journal, but it is great for the animals. Honey for coughs and colds. There is some evidence that honey may be as effective as the more common cough suppressant for coughs and colds and easing sore throats and things like that. And in one study, children ages 1 to 5 with upper respiratory tract infections were given 2 teaspoons of honey at bedtime. And it reduced nighttime coughing and improved sleep. And you won't have your child making that kind of a fuss if you ask them to take 2 teaspoons of honey. I know it works very well. You can put it in a herbal tea. You can mix it with a little lemon juice. It's really a good remedy. Again, you know, it's not going to replace an antibiotic for strep throat or something like that, but certainly as a supplement or as a, you know, first attempt to stop something, it is really good. Now, honey for seasonal allergies, maybe. This is a really big topic, and a lot of people who come to buy local honey are looking to buy it as a treatment for seasonal allergies. And it is true that allergies are often treated by repeated small doses of the allergens. And since the honey does have trace amounts of the pollen in it, it kind of makes sense that this might work. There isn't any clinical or scientific evidence to prove that it does. But still, a lot of people swear by it. The one thing I would say is to remember that it might be important when the honey is harvested. So if you have allergies to fall flowers, it's not going to help you too much if the honey was harvested in the spring, because those flowers would not have been blooming then. So you would have to look for honey that's harvested later in the year. And also, you don't really know what is in the honey. It may be the pollen you're looking for, it may not be. Bees tend to be attracted to flowers that have sticky pollen. You know, so that sticks to them, and that has to be transmitted from flower to flower by a pollinator. Other plants have airborne pollen, and it's airborne pollen that causes most of the allergies. And there's a little bit less of that in the hives, but there is some. So, you know, it could work. People who use it say you need to start about 6 to 8 weeks before springtime to get it to work. It's worth a shot. But it may just be that honey is an effective cough suppressant with anti-inflammatory effects, and that may relieve some of the allergy symptoms as well. Now, just a few little interesting facts about bees and what it takes to produce all of these wonderful products. A worker bee visits 2,000 flowers each day, 50 to 100 per trip to and from the hive. And they need the nectar from 2 million flowers to make a pound of honey. That's a lot of work for the bees. And a worker bee makes 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in her 6 to 8 week lifetime. So when you're drinking your tea with a teaspoon of honey in it, you're drinking the life's work of 12 honeybees. Now, I can't end this without talking a little bit about the threats to honeybees. And the biggest threat, because I'm sure people have heard that honeybee colonies are collapsing, and in Virginia, I think last year was about 50% of all hives died. And the biggest problem is varroa mites, varroa destructor. And this causes a disease within the honeybees. And if there is enough in a hive, the hive will die. So one of the most important things that beekeepers do is continually inspect their hives for these mites and treat hives throughout the year. And there are treatments for the hives that are good in that we can treat them even while we're collecting honey from the hives. We use formic acid, which is in honey anyway, and also oxalic acid, the same thing. Those two, oxalic acid and formic acid, are natural products. They are naturally in honey in small amounts, and using them to treat the hives doesn't change the amount that's in the honey. So those are safe treatments. The other big problem we have is pesticides and insecticides. Widespread spraying, it kills honeybees. There are no safe insecticides. There are no insecticides that so specifically target a different insect that they don't harm the honeybees. So we need to reduce the amount of insecticide used. So best way to do that is to fill your garden with native plants, and they will be able to thrive here even with the insects that are here, and you won't need to use as many insecticides. Don't buy plants or seeds that are treated with the neonics. These are systemic insecticides that are absorbed into the plant, and they are also harmful to bees. And you can work with your neighbors, your homeowners association, and your larger community to eliminate or limit the use of pesticides. There are some things that can be done, spraying at night when bees are not out. Spraying low to the ground, not spraying the flowers, spraying, the ground and the leaves, but not the flowers. All of these things can help. And remember, if nothing is eaten, you're eating your garden isn't part of the ecosystem, and you really want it to be. Now, as an alternative to honeybees, for people who are interested in having bees around and having good pollinators around, we have a lot of native bees. The most common that we see are mason bees, bumblebees, and leaf cutter bees. These are all even better pollinators than the honeybees are. And if you can attract them to your yard, they'll do a great job for you. And they will stay around. They won't forage so far, and you can attract them by putting up these very interesting little bee hotels. Although this is actually an old slide that I have, and now some new information is saying it's not really good to concentrate them in such large amounts, and it's better to put a few smaller bee houses scattered around your yard to prevent the spread of disease and predation. It's a little bit better. So keep that in mind, but you put these things up and they will come and they will help you with your yard, and they will get your garden growing. Skip over this for a minute and come on to here for questions while we still have a little bit of time.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was fascinating. Someone's asking, can you go back to the slide about how many flowers the bees visit a day?
Okay. Let's see. Okay, it's probably easier to do this way.
Yeah.
And while you're doing that, I have another question.
Okay.
She writes, I am a beekeeper in Baltimore. I have had 3 swarms in 2 days. I wish I had split my hives earlier this spring. Do you split each spring?
I have to confess that we have had that same experience, and we do try to get in there and split each spring. This is swarm season, and so I'm hearing from beekeepers all over that swarms are flying over their heads. We do try to get in there. We do try to do the splits ahead of time. Unfortunately, it's not always successful. Sometimes the new queen doesn't come back. It's a hard thing. I do recommend putting out some traps. Um, just put a box out there with some frames and some swarm commander or something, and then hopefully if a hive swarms, they might find that box. But yeah, this is a this is swarm season, and it's hard to stay ahead of it.
We do go in and try to split. In fact, we did a couple of splits 2 weekends ago. Within the next 2 weeks or so, we'll see how successful that was.
Okay. Will the cicadas have any effect on bees or their habits this year?
I've never heard anyone complain about it, about
Okay.
cicadas.
Oh, cicadas.
Yeah.
I don't think it would, because I don't think there would be any competition with the cicadas.
Okay.
It's interesting though.
I
I guess we'll see, right?
Yeah, we'll see, right? Couple weeks. Okay, another question. I bought a bee house, but didn't realize, whoops, hold on a second. But didn't realize that you need to have the opening facing east. I haven't put it up because I really don't have a good place in my yard that faces the rising sun. Is it necessary?
Southeast will work.
Even south might work.
South might work as well.
What was the first thing you said? I'm sorry, you're a little far from the speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry. Either southeast or even facing south should work.
Okay.
Actually, I have seen where people have put four hives facing four different directions.
Huh.
You could give it a try, get it as close to east or southeast as you can.
Okay. And she said she has southern exposure, so that would
bee
work.
house, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it still might work. Yeah.
Okay. So southern exposure. Okay. Yeah, she said it's not a hive, just a house.
Just a house, yeah. So as close to south or southeast to east, any direction that, just not like northwest.
Okay. Next question. We have many fruit trees and would love to attract native bees like your last slide. Can you give suggestions?
No, I'm having a hard time.
Turn the volume up, yeah. Oh, no, it's your computer.
Anyway.
The question was, they have fruit trees and they want to attract native bees. So any suggestions on how to do that?
Well, the best way to attract native bees is to have native plants, and as many native plants as you can. Also, many native bees are ground nesting bees. So, leave some open space, a little bit of open dirt around your yard so that they can nest there, and be careful that, they might be there, and then that you don't, cover them up and run over them and things like that. A couple of those bee houses might be helpful. If you're really, interested in working on it, for the mason bees, you can actually almost raise them. You can get houses that, they will build in, and then you kind of take that in for the winter so that there's no predation on them and put them back out there. You can actually kind of manage them a little bit. But the best thing is just lots of native plants, be as native as possible, and no pesticides, no insecticides. Water, a little water source too, is always good. That would be just like, the kind of thing that you would put under a large flower pot. Fill it with gravel and then water so bees can land on it and not drown in it. And water source is very helpful.
Is there any way for her to incorporate the fruit trees in the attraction?
Well, the fruit trees will attract the bees on their own. I mean, when they flower, the bees will forage on them.
Yeah, but building up the whole area to be supportive of native pollinators will help that as well.
Right, because then you'll have the native pollinators around throughout the season. You know, they won't have to find your trees just in the time when they're blooming. They'll already be there. Then when the trees bloom, the bees will be there.
Okay, and she's asking native Virginia plants or native US plants? You're
Native
saying
Virginia plants,
Okay.
definitely. And you know, that's a little bit tricky sometimes because I know you buy seeds and it says like mid-Atlantic, and that just means they grow well here. It doesn't mean they're native here. But you know, throughout this area, there are many nurseries that are selling native plants. Loudon Wildlife Conservancy is a great resource for that. And they have a couple of times a year native plant sales. And some of the other organizations,
Master Gardeners.
Master Gardeners does it. Master Gardeners is a great resource. Virginia Master Gardeners, you can give them a call and they have people that will come out and you know, help you to, you know, they'll kind of go through your garden, help you identify everything that's there, what's native, what's not native, and help you to plan a good native Virginia garden.
Oh, that's great to know. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you can find them online. Virginia Master Naturalists, they're fantastic.
Can you
Not
please
Master
put up,
Naturalists, Master Gardeners, Virginia Master Gardeners.
can you put up your last slide so we can see your contact information? Someone's asking, where is our local beekeeping club? Is there a website?
Yes,
Could you
it's,
put up your last slide?
the beekeeping is loudonbees.org.
Well, wait, let me say something. This is our contact information at Secret Garden Birds and Bees. There are a number of beekeeping organizations in the area, but for us, it would be Loudon Beekeepers.
Loudonbee.org.
Loudonbee.org. Loudonbee, one word.org.
Okay.
They're a great group. We are just getting, I'm hoping that soon we'll get back to having our regular monthly meetings and things like that. COVID has kind of.
We've been holding them virtually. We meet once a month. And we have both local people talk, and we also have brought in some very prominent people doing research. Look, actually, with COVID, that has been easier because we didn't have to pay for them to travel here.
Yeah, that's great to know. Is there ever any controversy about beekeeping that it prevents the bees from doing what they do naturally, building their hives and things, or they're able to carry on just as they would in the boxes?
I there is occasionally some question about the treatment of the bees in the hives. I think because they are not native here, I think that the bees in the hives are doing much better than feral bees might do. Most you know, smaller local beekeepers really do take very good care of their bees. We're very careful not to not to injure bees. In fact, I'm just gonna. There was a slide I skipped on here. This was a thing that happened when we had a warm day in February, and the bees left the hive and went out, and they actually did find some pollen. You can see it on the leg of that bee, and they but it got cold as the sun went down and they didn't make it back to the hive. They really can't fly much below 50 or 55 degrees, and they all ended up on the snow. And I was just so horrified. And I picked up some of them and I brought them inside to show Tim, and I had put them on the counter. When I came back to get them, they were gone. And I realized that they weren't dead, they were just chilled. And so then I went out and I picked up all of the bees that I could find. I must have picked up hundreds of bees. I brought them all in, I put them in the jar. They all revived, and the next morning I put them back in the hive. So this is the kind of thing that local beekeepers do. We take care of our hives.
Yeah.
So, we do try to be careful, but I know that sometimes PETA and other organizations talk about that the bees are being abused, that their food is being stolen from them, things like that. But like I said, we make sure that they have all of the food that they need for the winter. We give them supplemental food if they are running low. We treat them for diseases. I would argue that it's good treatment of the bees, which isn't to say that's true everywhere. I think there may be some, industrial operations.
Industrial operations are the ones that take a lot of the flack. There's these people have 2,000 and 3,000 hives that they basically drive them from Florida to California, stick them in the almond groves, and then after the almonds are pollinated, they throw them on the truck and drive them back to Florida. It's not really, yeah.
And that's a little bit different, but the one controversy I have heard is that honeybees are interfering with native bees because they're foraging on the same flowers, and it could be a limited resource. But the answer to that is plant more flowers.
Yeah.
And I really don't think it's a problem. There are not that many honeybees compared to native bees, just population-wise.
Do you have to have bees to join the bee club?
No, anybody can join the bee club.
Okay. And can you see the mites with the naked eye, or do you check for them under a microscope?
You can see them with the naked eye. They're kind of hard to see. We use jeweler magnifiers, which are anywhere from 2 to 5x, and then you can get a good, you can see them pretty well.
And the way you find them is we use sometimes a mite board that we put underneath the hive, and as the mites die, they fall off. I mean, they have a limited lifespan, so they fall off, and you can see them on that bottom board. Another way, there are 2 other ways, are sugar rolls. So you take a cup of bees, literally a cup of bees, and you put it in a jar with powdered sugar, and you shake it all up, and the mites come off the bees. And then you can let the bees go back to the hive, and then you go through the sugar and see how many mites you have.
Oh, neat.
The most accurate way is an alcohol roll, and that you put a cup of bees in alcohol, and that's a very accurate count, but it does kill the bees, unfortunately.
Yeah, I
But
imagine.
again, we have to think of the hive as a superorganism, and so what you're doing is possibly saving the hive at the expense of some bees.
Someone's asking, was there a problem with bees disappearing, and what was the reason?
By disappearing, there's a couple of things. Bees will, for what appears to us no particular reason, will just abscond. They will go. And a lot of times, if you look at why later on, it's either because there's a high mite load in there and they're trying to get away from it, or there's too much moisture, or something that's making that in their mind that hive is not livable.
Are we talking about just honeybees, though, or bees in general?
She wasn't clear. Kim, do you want to be more specific? General.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah. So that goes along with insects. I mean, the number of insects is decreasing dramatically, and that is a problem. And that is probably due to insecticides, most likely. We've really gone kind of crazy with insecticides. So that's that's again why we talk about native plants and being, recognizing that we need to live with some insects. They are an important part of the ecosystem, and killing them all off is just not the way to go. Lawns, I mean, that beautiful green lawn that some people want to have is a death trap. It's so many insecticides on there that kill so many insects, and it's a monoculture. We need diversity in the environment. And, we've been losing that. We've been losing native plants. We've been losing, it's just, we've tried to control everything a little bit too much. So I'm kind of, I guess, a supporter of rewilding things a bit and, bringing back some insects.
I understand. Yeah. You said that the Manuka honey, right?
Manuka honey, yes.
Manuka honey is the healthiest one. Is that just because that's the one that they're doing the research on, or is there something special about that honey that makes it
It
healthier?
does seem to be special. It does
Okay.
seem to be to have larger amounts of the anti-inflammatory properties, the antibacterial properties, than just about any other honey.
Why would
But
that be?
it's just what's in that plant.
Okay.
It's that other one that's like that is, people use a lot of tea tree oil, which is another plant that seems to have a lot of good medicinal properties. So, but any honey can be used medicinally, not just Manuka. And you do have a point that, there's been kind of a focus on Manuka honey and not as much on other types of honey.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Which of course has made it more expensive.
Yeah, that I have noticed. And that's another question then. How do you, when you're, is it best to get, local honey from your farmer, at your farmer's market? It hasn't traveled, it's from flowers that are local. Is there a real advantage to that? I've heard there is.
I think there is. It's the local honey it just seems to taste better. You can often taste more of the flowers in it. It has more of a floral smell. It's not as blended, so it really, and there will be differences. If you go from one person's honey to another person's honey, it will be different. That was why it was so much fun to do these honey tastings at the fair, where people could taste 10 different honeys from 10 different beekeepers, all of them in Loudoun County. And, all 10 were really distinct from each other. And it's just a matter of when they were harvested and where in the county.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So you need to find the honey that you like best, or the honey, or if you're looking to alleviate your allergies, the honey that came from the flowers that you're allergic to.
I try, this isn't a local honey. I love local honey, but I did try once chestnut honey, which is really good. Boy, oh
Oh
boy.
yeah.
Yeah. Someone's asking, did she read correctly that honey is acid, one of the medicinal properties?
Yes, it is acidic. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Now, not acidic like hydrochloric acid, but
Right.
it is slightly acidic.
Okay. And then I I have a bird's nest, and when I'm out on my deck, I realize there's this, I think it's one bee who's constantly circling around this bird's nest. He's always been, is there some sort of relationship there?
So is it a bumblebee or
It's a big bee.
it's a big bee?
It must be a bumblebee because it's a really,
Now, or it could be a carpenter bee.
oh, okay.
The difference is if you can get a close look, the bumblebee's got a fuzzy butt and the carpenter bee's got a smooth butt.
Yeah, okay, let me look. I think
Yeah,
it's,
I don't know why it's probably defending the nest.
you think,
The
I
nest
was
of bees,
wondering
the bee's
that.
nest, the bee's nest, not the bird's nest. From the birds, because birds would be dangerous to bees. Many
But it's a
birds would be.
bird's nest. I don't see a bee's nest there. And it
You
just
might not
hangs.
see it. If it's a bumblebee, it would be a nest in the ground somewhere.
But this is hanging like from the gutter, the bird's nest. It's in the gutter. So it's high. And the
It
bee
might be a carpenter bee.
just hangs out for
I
hours
have
around it.
we have one carpenter bee out back of our house. I can't sit at the table on my deck because this bee just harasses me the whole time. And that is a carpenter bee. They have a nest in one of the posts in our deck.
I thought maybe there was something the birds use to make the nest that the bee likes.
I
You know,
I don't know. It might. I wonder though if it could have a nest I don't know.
it's just a
That's
curiosity.
that's interesting though. That's really interesting. I'll have
It
to
really
go.
is.
I got to
Yeah,
do a little research on that.
let me know if you find something out because I'm really
I will.
fascinated by this little bee who won't leave the bird's nest. Any other questions for Liz and Jim? Where do you sell your honey, Liz and Jim?
We have sold ours at the Bluemont Fair,
Okay.
and other than that, we sell just around to
Word of mouth.
word of mouth. Yeah.
Oh,
We have some people who, that are kind of regulars that now we just every year provide honey. And of course, the
it's
harvest varies every year. Some years we get a lot, some years not as much.
and tell me how you guys use on honey, how you eat honey. What do you put it on, or do you cook it in things, or
Oh, I use it on everything. I that's my primary sweetener. I use it
It's
on,
basically it's replaced sugar.
yeah.
We don't use refined sugar. I do all the baking and
okay?
cooking, and if the recipe calls for sugar, I use the honey. It's a 1-to-1 replacement.
Is it
So
really a one to
yeah,
one? So a cup of
yeah,
sugar is a cup of honey.
that's correct.
Wow, interesting.
So we use it on everything. And I use it in tea, I use it on bread.
I think that's
And I
great
didn't
on
mention
bread
that,
with cinnamon sprinkled on top. Have you ever tried
yeah.
that? Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Someone's
And
asking.
I should have mentioned to people, it doesn't matter if it crystallizes. We had one year all the honey crystallized because it just depends on the sugar, the balance of different sugars in it, and whatever they had found that year, it crystallized. And I kind of liked it because it was much easier to spread and
Yeah.
not so liquidy. So, that's also fine too. And you can get it to uncrystallize by just warming it in a little warm water.
Now I heard that's not good to heat honey. Is that true?
Not to heat it, just to use a little bit of warm water, not hot. Um,
About
Put it in
100,
like a pot of warm water or
yeah,
something?
like
Okay.
about give you about 110,
yeah,
Not
I
boiled.
mean,
and just it will it'll be fine. Don't microwave it. It will develop hot spots.
yeah, and if you heat it up too hot, you will destroy all of the beneficial
Yeah.
properties. So
Yeah.
yeah, just warm.
We sell hours and slightly
Someone's asking what the difference is between raw and other honey.
Between what?
raw and honey.
Oh, so raw honey is not, it's really not processed in any way except for possibly filtering it. Some honey, that you might find, there is honey that is, they claim is pasteurized.
Yeah.
There is no need to do that. And if you do that, if you pasteurize it, you have destroyed it. It's going to actually spoil. Raw honey will last forever. If there was honey in that jar that they found that's 3,500 years old, it's probably still good. If you try to pasteurize it or sterilize it in any way, you've absolutely ruined it and it will spoil then. And, so you do want raw means that it's not processed.
And if it's pasteurized, do they have to say that on the label?
I would think so. But there are a lot of, I read a lot about kind of fake honey out there, things that aren't even really honey at all,
Oh,
that
wow.
look like honey. And, one way to tell is in a lab, they could look to see if there are the trace amounts of pollen in it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I don't know. But there is fake honey out there. There is honey that bees have made from just sugar water, which is not honey either.
Oh, boy. You would think they would have to disclose that on the label.
You would think, right? But
Yeah.
It's not even legal. It's not even legal to sell what they call adulterated honey. We do when there's no nectar flow, we feed our bees sugar water to supplement. And
Yeah.
that time, once we start that, our harvesting of honey is over. We're not
Right.
allowed to take that now.
Interesting.
Well, there's nothing wrong with it. We're not allowed to sell it. I could take it and eat it myself. Probably won't taste great because there's no flavoring from the nectar, but
Right.
there's nothing, there's nothing bad about it. It's just not honey.
Someone's asking how you got started working with bees.
Basically, the first thing we did was join the bee association, the bee club, and went to a few lectures, decided it was something we wanted to try, and they offer training, and that if you're interested, I totally recommend taking a course because there's a lot to learn up front that'll save you a lot of money, after you destroy your hives 4 or 5 times. Also, by going through the club, you get a mentor, and that has been the biggest way for us to learn is we had a very good mentor.
Yeah.
now, even though we are mentoring new beekeepers, we still have a mentor who is a much more experienced beekeeper than we are that we go to a lot. So, it's a good community that really helps each other. But I second what Tim said. Definitely take a class. That they're usually offered early in the year, so January, February timeframe. And that works because if you're starting out, you want to get your bees in April or May. Right now, people are just starting with their bees. So, you have the course, you have time to buy all your materials that you need for your hives, and then you get your bees. So, classes are pretty much over for this year, but they would be starting up and they fill up fast. I mean, and you really have to register by November for most of them.
Oh,
Although
wow.
now it's a little different because this year was the first year it was virtual. So I don't know if they'll keep doing that, and I almost kind of hope they do.
Yeah, there's definitely advantages, right?
Yeah. Or maybe have an option for in-person or virtual. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for giving us your time. You covered so much about bees, and it's just fascinating. I really enjoyed the presentation, and there's lots of comments from people saying the same. So thank you both, and good luck with your beekeeping endeavors. I hope to taste your honey. I'll have to come to the Blue Monk Fair and get some.
Yeah, hopefully they will have, it looks like they'll be having it this year, at least so far. So
That's what I
Hopefully we get a
heard.
good harvest.
Thank you again. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.